I started the band Karizma in 1975, and we originally spelled it Charisma. We started playing at the Comeback Inn in Venice Beach, California. We were on a street called West Washington, which is now Abbot Kinney. It's a very fancy upscale street. When we played there, it was kind of run down and a little bit on the seedy side. Back in the 70s, Venice was a center of counterculture and meatless restaurants and people out on the boardwalk playing bongos and reciting poetry and stuff. And we were playing there with Karizma, and that's when all the magic started. During the days at the Comeback Inn in Venice, we had quite an array of people come down to see us and hang out with us, including Freddie Hubbard, Chester Thompson, who was in the group Weather Report at the time, and many others.
The first time I heard Karizma was down at the Comeback Inn. That was before I was a member of the band, but knew most of the players in the band. The trumpet player was a good friend of mine. We had come out here. We had a Motown record deal, and we did a few records. We met David Garfield at a club in Redondo Beach called Castagnola's Plush Horse. He came out, checked the band out, and he loved Ralph Rickard's playing, so when David formed his band Karizma originally, Ralph was part of that.
The original band was Ralph Rickard on trumpet, Carlos Vega on drums, Richard Tokatz on percussion, and Dominic Genova on bass. Karizma has been in many incarnations over the years. On one of our albums, Lost and Found, we have a listing of all the different bands and incarnations. Originally it was a band without guitar and was an instrumental band. Later we added the guitarist Mike Landau, who was an up-and-coming, not known yet guitarist living at his mom's out in Pacific Palisades. And we did quite a bit of work with Mike, and he became a writer, one of the prominent members, and went on to a brilliant career. Other members of the band included the great Carlos Vega, who was a top session drummer, played on many hit records, and then, of course, grew on to many other things, so we had to replace him. And we found a guy named Vinny Colaiuta, who was new in town from the East Coast, and he was working with Frank Zappa, and he was hanging out in the Baked Potato watching us one night. We asked him to come up and sit in, and the rest was history. From 1975 moving forward, we were discovered by many people down there at the Comeback Inn, and eventually we went off to play with others. Willie Bobo heard about us, came down, recruited Carlos and I to join his band in 1976. What happened was we disbanded Karizma. Carlos, Dean, and I all joined Willie Bobo. After 6 months with Willie, Carlos and Dean joined Caldera, but I joined Freddie Hubbard. So I went with Freddie, they went with Caldera.
Yeah.
And then a couple years or a year and a half went by with no Karizma. Then we reformed the band, and that's when Carlos told me, because you have to get Lenny Castro, Mike Landau, and Dean Cortez. This is what I told him. I said, Lenny Castro, he scares me. I'm scared of him.
I first met Carlos Vega before I did the Toto stuff. I was going to hang out in a club. He was playing there with a big band, and I was really amazed about how he played. I guess we just started talking, and one thing led to another. That kind of led to the Karizma thing, which was with David Garfield and the rest of the guys. It seemed like a natural progression because most of the guys in the band, in Boz's band, were from the Valley. And then the Karizma thing we were all the guys in Karizma from the Valley too. So we were all basically a community.
So there's this guy, his name was David Garfield, called me and said, I want you to play with this band for a couple of gigs that Dean can't make. And I went to a rehearsal at Landau's garage. And Karizma had these songs with the greatest chord changes and chord patterns that were really not common at all. Just really great stuff. And it was a thrill to play with that band.
When David came back to town, I happened to have a little gig on the pier in Redondo Beach at a place called Hollahan's. And I asked David if he'd want to play, and to my surprise, he said yes. So we played for a couple of months down there on Thursdays, and then David decided to reform Karizma. and he asked me to join. I believe it was in 1978. David reorganized the band. He said he was putting this group together. Of course, Carlos was in the group also. Carlos and David always had a connection that was different and went beyond just music. Also, then David decided to bring in Dean Cortez on bass, and Lenny Castro on percussion, and Mike Landau on guitar.
The amazing Mr. Please Please himself on guitar from Los Angeles, Michael Landau. On bass, we call him Mean Dean. Mean Dean Cortez on bass. New York City's finest, Mr. Lenny Castro on percussion.
So you were on the tour for Down 2, then left. When you were with Boz originally, you were with Luke.
Yeah, me and Luke got in the band together.
But at some point, Luke and Jeff left Boz, but you stayed.
Yeah, I stayed on because the guys were working on the albums and stuff like that. They were working on the Toto stuff.
It transitioned to Landau. Tell us about that change.
Landau came in and Dean Cortez came in to the band. We kind of started locking up. So when we got home, it seemed to be like a natural thing just to transfer all those energies that we had developed and put it into the Karizma situation. It was just something that was going to happen. It was a no-brainer.
Ever since Michael Landau was in Karizma, his good buddy Steve Lukather and the other members of Toto would show up at our gigs. And this is going back to the Sound Room in 1978. And they were just recording down the street at Davlin Studios on Lankershim. We were in Ventura Boulevard in Studio City. They would come to the gig. Lenny Castro was in the band. And actually, they'd all worked with Boz Scaggs together. Lenny, Jeff Porcaro, David Page, Steve Lukather, and Michael Landau, at different times. And of course, Steve Porcaro was on the scene as well. So it was like a big family.
Boy, my memories of seeing Karizma back in the day was, it was a thing every Tuesday night at the Sound Room. That's where we went to hear great new music. And that was such an exciting time for all of us. All of our careers seemed to have been burgeoning at the same time. And I just have nothing but pleasant, joyful, excited memories about that time.
Well, the Sound Room was a great little place. What I remember mostly about that place has nothing to do with music. It's just like Carlos loved the jazz burger. Every time he played there, he just, I'm gonna have a jazz burger.
We were at the Sound Room for several months before David got a call and asked if we wanted to play at the Baked Potato. It was the scene at the time.
1978, we moved to the Baked Potato and we had a residency there, capacity crowds every week on Tuesday nights for about a year and a half.
It was a real band. It was very rare these days to have a band that we'd rehearse once or twice a week besides playing at the Baked Potato. And then after the shows, we'd go to somebody's house, Vinny's, or sometimes to my house, and we'd listen to the whole show. We'd hang out late, and then we'd say, well, see you Thursday for rehearsal. It was really an important part of my life, and I think everybody in the band really felt like it was an honest-to-goodness band.
Karizma did all original music, and I wrote most of it, and then I did a lot of co-writing with Michael Landau. We wrote some really nice music together. A very distinctive sound that only came from the two of us collaborating.
We'd meet at David's apartment on Hayworth in Hollywood, right off of Hayworth and Fountain. Mike would bring his guitar over, and I'd have my saxophone there, and David would sit at the piano. And I'd watch David and Mike work out these incredibly complex voicings between piano and guitar. And then when it was time for the melody, I'd get to put in some of my ideas and be a co-writer on some of the songs also. I did write some music for Karizma. The song that I pretty much wrote by myself was called Balls. But when I say I wrote it by myself, I brought in my idea, and David was able to put his magic on it, so to speak, and everybody did. Being in the room and adding a few notes or giving the start to a bridge, it's like everybody was included. That's what gave it that band feeling. It was like everybody really felt they had strong input, and that was part of the magic of the sound of the band.
We had so many CDs out. The first one was recorded by the great Al Schmidt, who's no longer with us, but Al recorded it and helped me produce it. We did it at Sunset Sound in Hollywood. We had guest artists like Tom Scott and David Page, Neil Larson, Steve Lukather, Jeff Porcaro on that record. It was a wonderful record. That was the first one, Dream Come True. Later, we did a live to 2-track in the studio called Cuba, which had Mike Landau and Steve Lukather together.
My first memory of Karizma was working on the Cuba album. No multi-track, no remix, just capturing what was going on in the studio at the time. That was a pretty amazing project. We had, of course, Carlos on drums, and we had Lenny Castro and Luis Conte on percussion and David on keyboards. But then there was a rotating cast throughout the 2 days that we recorded this of guitar players and bass players and horn players. We didn't have a lot of time to do this. We basically locked out the studio for 2 days, came in, did about 12 hours the first day and about 8 hours the second day. On the first day of the recording, we had a fairly remarkable guitar duo of Steve Lukather and Michael Landau, who of course were two of the top studio guitar players and to this day still are. As far as I know, it was one of the first times the two of them had been recorded together. One of the things that you realize when listening to that is even though both of them had very, very similar setups and rigs, it's a completely different sound coming out of each of them when they're trading back and forth. You know Steve Lukather when you hear him, you know Michael Landau when you hear him, and it's not as, it's not about the gear, it's about the fingers. But it was a lot of fun. It was really, really a lot of fun. A lot of energy.
So besides the recording, then David started getting some calls to take the band to Japan. Sadao Watanabe used to have a festival every year in Tokyo, Sadao Watanabe's Bravas Club. So we had a great time. I mean, it was just like, it was kind of a dream, traveling to a place like Japan with your best buddies, playing music that I felt I was contributing to it musically, as far as compositionally, and also playing sax with this amazing lineup of musicians.
We were thrilled to go to Japan in the 80s and perform there. We recorded for a Japanese label.
We recorded all the way live. So I got to have both experiences with them. I got to both mix them as a live band, and I also got to, of course, record them. As an engineer and as David's co-producer, probably the highlight was when we did the Forever in the Arms of Love record, because that actually was the first one that we really got a chance to take advantage of the studio and do multi-track recording, plus bring in a lot of really, spectacular guest musicians to augment the band. I also got a chance in a similar way where I got to record Steve Lukather and Michael Landau together. I got to record Lenny Castro, and on either side of him was Vinnie Colaiuta and Carlos Vega. One little thing I really loved about that was that when I was putting together the headphone mixes for them, each one wanted to make sure that they could hear the other person's hi-hat. They wanted to use that as a way of not stepping on each other's parts, of complementing each other versus just blazing ahead, with the performances.
Between these members, there was kind of a family. Lenny Castro, there from the beginning, Luis Conte, Carlos and Vinny. And Carlos was always in awe of the way you knew what to play for the song and not to make it turn it into a friggin' timbali solo. Right.
Working with the band through all of those years was a treat, because not only was I having an opportunity to work with some of the greatest musicians on the planet, but I developed friendships and relationships with these people. When they were playing live, I would get to go down and hang out at the club, and so I got a front row seat to some wonderful performances.
Jumped to 2000, and then the band went through iterations of Karizma. In 2000, Vinny, who had his album out, wanted to showcase his record and showcase himself, and wanted to do the Modern Drummer Festival over in Koblenz, Germany. He knew that the best format for him to play and be himself and be creative was Karizma and all the Karizma material. So he put that gig together in Koblenz. We were the stars of the show, and he called Ulf, and he booked a tour. A bus showed up, and there we were on tour from one gig.
Back in 1986, when I came into town, I started going to Big Theater. I discovered Karizma. Everything was mesmerized, like playing musicianship and tunes. Every week, I sit there in the one, spot that I usually sit and just watching, soak into the, ensemble and sound and everything. That was my school. Then, became regular playing at the Potato after that since 92. Now it's like 2023, and I'm kind of joining Karizma, and that's so much, just so honor for me to playing with these wonderful musicians and still learning every time I play with them and just how to listening to each other, and it's a dream come true.
Some amazing music was made, and it's all online now, and we do have the CDs in our garage. Since the pandemic, people moving away, a lack of venues being open, we have not performed in some time. But you never know when we're going to get it back together. Having traveled since the 70s constantly, I actually don't miss traveling right now. Happy to spend more time at home, where I'm writing, recording, producing, releasing, promoting music, working on video content for our YouTube channel, and releasing archival footage which has been in the vault for years and we've never known quite what to do with it. Now on our YouTube channel, we're sharing a lot of this with you. We hope you enjoy hearing the stories about these great bands and learning about how they formed and what was really going on. And we'll be sharing a lot more from our archives, as well as putting out a lot of new music in the time to come. Thank you so much for listening to us and coming to our shows over the years.